countries historically and governments historically have used food as a weapon. And there's many, many examples of governments that cut off the food supply to the people to basically have them behave in the way that they wanted them to behave. Henry Kissinger is quoted as saying, if you control the food, you control the people, and that's how you control a nation. That our very genetics are deteriorating, and we're absolutely destroying our species through this poor food supply. We have to turn this around because we're killing ourselves. As I said, the food supply is toxic, and we absolutely have to turn this around.
Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. I brought back Marjory Wildcraft, who runs the Grow Network, which is the largest of its kind in the world. And it's a community of people that get together to learn how to grow their own food and medicine and all sorts of things. And I started doing more research after the first time that I interviewed her, and I made the realization of how much our food affects everything. It creates the instability in countries. I mean, it's actually the most basic weapon of war that governments use against each other. It's the reason why countries are unstable. When they do riot, it's food-based. It's also in our country, it's a reason why we're so fat and sick, because our food doesn't have any nutrition. And so I wanted to bring her back, talk to the expert on why this is happening, why it's important, get a bunch of information. She has this 72-hour free documentary series on how to grow your own food. And she's so passionate about why she does this. This is her life passion, and educating people on why it's so critically important for our country and everybody around the world. And a lot of examples of what's going on. And we don't think it's that big of a deal because we see it we have food everywhere. But she's going to educate us on the reality of our situation and why we're all so fat. And I mean, you have to admit, when we were growing up, we were all thin compared to now. I mean, no one was there was always a few. In general, everybody is heavy now, and it didn't used to be that way. And it's not like that in every country. If you go to France, people are thin. And I remember going to France and talking to some people who visited the United States for a few months and gained a ton of weight, went back and took them a while to lose weight, and they didn't change their eating habits at all. Really gives you an idea that there's something else going on here. So let's get into that interview now with Marjory Wildcraft. Hi, Marjory. Welcome back to the program.
Sarah, thanks for having me back on.
Well, we have some big things to talk about. Since the last one, I started really thinking and diving into this issue, and I realized how serious, how big of a deal the food is, not only when it comes to our health, but also as far as keeping a country stable, all sorts of things. The FBI and Department of Homeland Security says it's one of the most important risk factors, one of the important sectors we have in the country as far as being vulnerable either to an attack or man-made or some kind of problem. Do you agree with that assessment?
I absolutely do. I think people don't have any idea of the risk and the vulnerability in the food supply. You go to a grocery store and there's like this huge, they're mega stores, right? There's huge amounts of food, and it really lulls us all into a sense of security that is absolutely false.
Well, it is, and we've never had, at least in our relative lifetime, in the early 70s, and we'll talk about it a little bit, we've never had food. In fact, we're all heavy, most of us,
yeah, right.
We got food on every corner, and we're trying to keep things away from ourselves. But it's more fragile than that. People say it's a fragile system.
It's really fragile. Most people don't realize that in that gigantic grocery store, here I'm in Texas, H-E-B is the big thing, right? And it's like you walk in and it's acres, right, of aisles and produce and meat and cans and boxes. What they don't realize, I run every morning, go run by your local grocery store at about 5 or 6 in the morning, and you'll see beep, beep, beep. There are semi-truck after semi-truck after semi-truck almost every day backing up into those stores. There's only 4 days worth of food supply in that entire grocery store. And it seemed, you're like, what? And really, there's no warehouses of it anywhere. We have this massive just-in-time trucking system. Your food travels to you on average about 1,500 miles. And that was a study that was done by the Leopold Center for Agriculture. The food, it's just not there. I mean, we have this huge perception. And then a lot of people think, right, we all got it in the back of our mind that if anything really bad happens, we'll go out in the countryside and get food from the countryside. Well, go drive around the countryside sometime. And I'm going to tell you, you remember all those Willie Nelson concerts to save the family farm? Mm-hmm. Well, bless his heart, he did good. But really, by and large, the family farm has been completely destroyed. Now, we're starting to rebuild back that infrastructure. But you go out in the countryside and there are not the small family farms dotted everywhere producing your food. Years ago, I always, you go up to the Northeast, New Jersey. It's called the Garden State, right? And I used to what are they thinking? No, New Jersey, the Garden State? Well, actually, New Jersey used to be an entire state of gardens that fed New York City. Now, what do we think of New Jersey now? Do we think of it as, gardens? No, of course not. All that's been, turned into whatever New Jersey is right now, which is not a lot of food production, right? And that same truth is true by every major city and pretty much every city in the United States and across the world. We've turned that into shopping malls and industrial parks and, high-tech centers and whatever. There's not any food production. And you go out in Texas, you'll see some cattle and you'll see a few things. But by and large, if that 4 days ever gets in, or if there's ever any interruption to that trucking system for any reason, and believe me, there are quite a few reasons of things that are very viable that could stop that trucking system, there's not going to be any food. And I mean, really, and even just in minor hurricanes, I'm sure you've seen, people go in and within minutes with these flash runs that we have now, like the water's gone, empty shelves of water just for a hurricane, right?
And everybody kind of laughs and thinks it's a joke, but it's not as much of a joke as people think it is.
It's true, and this is where we have this short-term problem hitting up a long-term solution. Learning to grow your own food is something that you can do, but it's not something you're going to do in 4 days.
Well, because it takes a longer time. Now, the food supply industry has a global intelligence where they can see all over the world how the crops are doing at any one day. It rivals the intelligence agencies, and it's worldwide. Now, do countries work well together in this system?
I was not aware of the intelligence, but it does not surprise me at all, because crops and water and sunlight and all the things that you need to grow food is, I now that you bring it up, I'm like, yeah, that must be so. Countries historically and governments historically have used food as a weapon. Even here in our United States during the Civil War, there was the blockade. The North was trying to cut off all the food supply to the South, right, to shut the South. And that is a traditional wartime tactic, right? And there's many, many examples of governments that cut off the food supply to the people to basically have them behave in the way that they wanted them to behave. Governments also, there's tons of in between of, this government trade tariffs and that one. And, I'm going to cut, I'm not going to sell you my food or I am going to sell you my food or, lots of, one example, I went to Cuba a few years ago to interview people who had survived what they call the special period. So right around 2000, maybe it was 1990 when the Soviet Union came. It was 1990 when the Soviet Union came apart. Well, Cuba had been a satellite trading partner to the Soviet Union, and they had grown sugar and sugarcane for the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union sent them food and textiles and energy and everything they needed. And Cuba had sacrificed all their indigenous local agriculture to produce this sugarcane for the stuff for the Soviet Union. Well, when that last Soviet ship pulled out because the Soviet Union was collapsing, all of a sudden in Cuba, like the lights go out, the water stops running, and the food supply just completely disappeared overnight. and a country of 11 million people, the average Cuban lost 20 pounds within the next few months.
That's an interesting story. And I remember back at that time, they had a huge campaign to get everybody growing their own food in their backyard or their windowsills, on their roofs, whatever it takes, because they realized that food was such an important part of their infrastructure.
And Cuba, very fortunately, lives in a tropical area where they can grow food most of the year. The North Korea had the same situation with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and they did not fare as well. And I think there were at least 1 million deaths due to starvation in North Korea.
Yeah, and I remember on the television when I was a kid growing up. I wasn't a kid. I was in college. I don't remember. Yeah, college, because it collapsed. The late 80s, right? And so I was college, and I remember on the television people laying on the sides of the street because they're all dying of starvation.
Yes.
I remember that footage that they were playing over and over again.
It's happening apparently in Venezuela right now with the government and Chavez and the whole whatever's going on. I'm really not that politically astute, but I do know that's food and medicine is a huge issue right now whenever you have any kind of turmoil or upset. I know people talk about collapse, and I've spent a lot of time looking at collapse. Economic collapse is the biggest threat to the United States, right? We are bankrupt. This country is entirely bankrupt, right? And you know what they say? You go bankrupt, you grow broke slowly until it happens all at once, right?
Well, yeah, because they keep everything stable. They don't want people to think it's not stable, because if they think it's not stable, it won't be stable. So they keep it stable in people's minds until it's not.
Right. And, 2008 we were teetering, right? And then, Obama comes in and starts spending $1 trillion a year, right? And that's egregious, but it kept the thing up, right? And they have to now keep maintaining those levels of spending to keep this thing going. And in my opinion, God bless them. Let's keep it up as long as we can.
Well, if they didn't steal all the stuff, I mean, we've found money now that have been stolen that exceeds our debt, but that's a whole other story.
Well, in any scenario, and there's lots and lots of scenarios of collapse, of economic collapse, Argentina not that long ago, throughout history, then there's Weimar Germany. And I've done a lot of interviews and a lot of historical reading. And absolutely in a collapse scenario, you do want to upgrade your defense, right? You're going to need to know how to handle, do personal defense, weapons, whatever, that's going to definitely be an issue. Medicine is absolutely going to be an issue, and you're going to want to have better care of yourself.
And you have medicine that people can do on their own, right? They can grow and stuff, and I've been talking about it on different videos and things.
And most people who prepare for collapse, those are the two things they focus on the most. But you know what? Every collapse survivor that I've interviewed and every historical book that I've read, people don't necessarily talk about the violence or the medical situation. They talk about starving. They talk about being hungry. They talk about, there's a dish in Mexico called eating leather or eating clothes. That came from a time when people were absolutely starving. So, being able to grow food, it's like being able to print your own money, really. So,
and I looked into it deeper, and there's a small set of families that control the food supply and worldwide. And they've been known in the past, and you're saying this, governments will do this, but the families themselves, if they can make more money from a different buyer, they've been known to do that and shift their goods elsewhere so they can make more money. And we just happen to be a good buyer. But could that happen here where they shift it to China or somewhere else because we don't have the funds to pay for it and they're going to pay a higher price?
That's absolutely a scenario. Absolutely. The dollar collapsing, the first time the U.S. defaults on its debt, that will be when the dollar collapses. That will be the definition of economic collapse in the United States. And absolutely, if we can't afford to pay, then they will absolutely sell that grain that they've been growing in Argentina or in Buenos Aires or in Brazil or all these other places. They'll sell it to the Chinese or the Europeans or whoever can pay the highest price for it. That's business 101, right? Even the Irish potato famine is a real good lesson. Or even in Weimar, Germany, when they were undergoing hyperinflation and collapse, there was still a lot of really good food production going on. But those farmers, the farmers in the countryside in Germany, even whether they were a government or they weren't, they tended to sell their products out of the country if they could, because they could get real money. Nobody in the German cities had money to buy their stuff. So, it's just a matter of basic economics, right? Like when you go broke and you don't have money. Yeah.
Well, and I was doing some research in the early 70s. We had a situation where they changed the regulations at a convenient time. Our government did, the USDA, so that the Soviet Union could purchase our grain. And so they purchased our grain because they had a shortage. And then what that did is overnight, the next year, I shouldn't say overnight, it was the next year. This happened in 72, and then 73, we had a major shortage, and then our prices went up by 28%. And we had enough wealth in this country overall where we could absorb a 28% increase. But the CIA claimed, they had hearings and all sorts of stuff. The CIA claimed that they were trying to give warnings. Everybody was pointing fingers, but at the end of the day, they claimed it was a bureaucratic thing that fell through the cracks. But the USDA lifted restrictions for a temporary time, even though that was going to happen. So it happened here already. It didn't affect us because we had the wealth then, but that's an indication that.
I know, and the Soviet Union at that time was like the boogeyman. That was the United States' biggest enemy. We're selling them grain. I hadn't been aware of that story. I'm going to do the research. You're doing really good background work.
Well, yeah, and
Sarah,
then,
yeah.
Well, and then you were talking about stability in countries, and that. And people, you think of like false flags or even real terrorist attacks. You think of that creating instability. You think of economic collapse creating instability. But
yeah,
it's the food, right?
It really is the food. I remember when I was first starting to become more politically aware, and I have to confess, I've not been politics is not my thing. I'm mostly into growing food and medicine and taking care of my family. But in the early 90s, we had all that Iraq stuff going on. And I was becoming more aware of the whole 9/11 thing. And I was like, this is egregious. Why aren't people out in the streets rioting over this? Like, what's wrong with Americans? There was a little bit of spunk in the 1%, the Wall Street thing. But it was nothing really. And I was like, why? And so I started doing a lot of research into what is the cause of riots. And it turns out there are a lot of other people that have done a lot of research on that. And everybody thought it would be like all this complex this and politics and that and, this charismatic leader or whatever, right? And it turns out, no, none of that is what is the cause of riots. There's one fundamental reason. It may have a different flavor or there may be a different label for it, but the fundamental reason is the cost of food. When you can no longer afford to eat, that's when people will riot. And there was a group that actually began to model this. I believe it's the Institute for Complex Systems. It's an interesting name. And they had this model created, and they actually were looking at the prices of food in the East, in the Middle East, and they were going, oh my gosh, I think that there's going to be based on our model, there's going to be a real big problem over in the Arab states or over in that region. And they tried to inform the United States government. Of course, how do you call the government and say, hey, I think there's going to be a riot, right? You don't. So, but these guys had totally predicted the Arab Spring. They totally saw that those riots, because they could see that the price of food was getting too high, that the average person could not eat anymore. And it's a pretty well-known, I think it's even Henry Kissinger is quoted as saying, if you control the food, you control the people, and that's how you control a nation. The Romans, give them bread and games and they will never riot. Like we're talking 2,000 years ago, the exact same wisdom. So I'm sure that, government leaders, the equivalent royalty we have now, which are the CEOs and top leaders of our multinational corporations, they are all very, very aware of this fundamental truth about the connection between food and the controlling the people.
Well, and the other thing that we're becoming aware of, which we touched in the last video, is just the nutritional element. And you were talking that our food supply, you made a mention to me, and that our food supply actually is in collapse because it's just not even, there's no nutrients in it.
Yeah, yeah, you were saying, hey, Marjorie, when is the collapse going to happen? I said, no, Sarah, it's collapse, right? There's, our food supply is toxic. And in my own eyes, right? I'm 55, and in my own eyes, I have seen when I was growing up, there were only like 2 or 3 fat people I knew of, and one was a fictitious character. That was Fat Albert, right? There was no, obesity just wasn't a thing. And I've seen it in just the last, in my lifetime, in these last few decades of the ballooning of America. And it's got to do with the food supply. I mean, yes, there are some lifestyle things that are happening too, but cheap carbohydrates make you fat. There are there's just no, your people who are eating too much because they're trying to get nutrition. There's no nutrition in that food. You keep eating more and more, you're basically gaining weight, but there's no nutrition in it. You're never going to get off of that cycle.
It's because your body's trying to suck up everything it can, store all the fat. Also, doesn't it store the toxins in the fat too to protect you?
That's a whole nother thing. Or it's very well known in the chicken industry, right? Tyson chicken and all these different chicken producers. They put a tiny bit of arsenic into the chicken feed. It doesn't kill them, although arsenic is a toxic thing. They put the arsenic into the chicken feed. This has been done for a long time, many decades. And what it makes the chickens do is it makes them gain weight because it makes them thirsty and they drink a lot of water. And so it makes them get heavier quicker, which is everything in the chicken industry. I mean, it's a very small margin industry. I mean, Tyson chicken has only got anywhere from 3 to 6% profit margin every year. So if you can add a little bit of arsenic and get those chickens a little bit fatter, a little bit heavier, then that actually can be the difference between a profitable and non-profitable year. Well, the problem with that is that arsenic, when you eat that chicken, you're getting a little bit of arsenic too. And arsenic in your cells is going to make you want to drink water, and it's going to make your cells retain water, and you're going to blow up and not be able to figure out why, because you're eating something that everybody says is healthy. You're eating chicken, right? So it's
and how about the pesticides?
Yes, there's that too. There's the pesticides and herbicides that they put on everything, and animals concentrate the toxins that they get in. And I'll give you one example from wildlife. So I'm a native of Florida, believe it or not, and my favorite animal is the Florida panther. Love this little wildcat. And whenever I go, I still got a lot of family. I go down to visit Florida, and we often go, like on trips to the Everglades or different parks or whatever to walk and hike. And I often talk to the wildlife biologist, and I say, how's the Florida panther doing? Well, in South Florida, the Florida panther is doing fine because the Florida panther is mostly eating the key deer, which is mostly just eating the wild grasses and forbs in that area. But up in North Florida, the Florida panther is really, really like getting sick and having strange diseases and dying because its main food source are raccoons. And the raccoons are either eating garbage or fish. And, they concentrate toxins. And then so basically you have a raccoon that's basically toxic, and then the Florida panther is eating these toxic raccoons, and they're having all kinds of strange diseases. So your chickens, they're feeding those chickens GMO corn or soybeans or whatever that has been not only grown in a strange way, but it's been grown with chemicals. And those chickens eating that feed are accumulating those toxins. So when you eat that chicken, or even those cows that have been forced into those confined feeding operations, or those pigs that have been raised in those unbelievably inhumane metal crates that have been basically force-fed this food that has all these herbicides and pesticides and toxins on it, well, all that accumulates in their bodies. And so when you're eating that pork chop from your local grocery store, you're getting a larger dose of pesticides and chemicals than you would if you were just eating the vegetables, which have them only sprayed on them.
Well, what do you think? Because I was thinking about this. You know, the pesticides, some of them are made where it goes and it causes the bacteria to get into their gut and they blow up or they whatever. The little bacteria that's on, or the little pests that are on there. Now, if we eat those pesticides, would our gut flora get into those and those die and blow up just like the pests would on the plants?
Very likely. Yeah, I wouldn't see why not. We also have a huge, the antibiotic resistance issue that we have with, we're breeding superbugs. The CDC is saying 23,000 Americans a year are dying because there are no antibiotics to treat the infections that they're having, like the antibiotics are becoming less and less effective. The our meat production industry is the largest culprit in that. It is by and large the largest user of antibiotics. So they are constantly, if you think about those chicken houses or those feeding operations where they have all those animals crammed together, what would happen naturally is those animals would die because nobody in their right mind should be crammed into those kind of conditions and fed those kind of foods. In order to keep those poor animals alive, they keep pumping them full of antibiotics and other medications.
So they're killing our antibiotic supply. Aren't they living in feces too?
Yes, it is just unbelievable. Cows up to their hocks in manure, and then this, the chicken and the pig facilities, they're basically raised in these cages where the feces falls through, but the stink is terrible, and it's just to me it's unconscionable to eat meat from the commercial meat supply. And it's one of the reasons we created, people said, hey, Marjory, you made this whole video on how to raise chickens in your backyard and then you kill them and eat them. And I'm like, yes, we do. Those chickens live beautiful, happy, healthy lives, it's unconscionable to eat the meat from the commercial food supply. The commercial food supply has collapsed. There is very little in a grocery store or a normal restaurant that is actually edible and healthy for you. You might eat it. It might taste good. They may have propped it up with enough chemicals and it may look good. They've got the whole coloring thing going on. That is not food for your human body. That is not food to nourish you.
And don't you have some free information as well on antibiotics? Do they work that you can make at home and things? Do they work just as good or better now because of the antibiotics that are getting messed up with the food supply?
Well, fortunately, before pharmaceutical antibiotics came along, there are traditions that go back thousands and thousands of years for how to treat infections. I mean, if you think about it, back in we see those enactments of the Greeks and the Romans, and they're bashing each other with these swords, and they got that whole thing going on. And, sure, a lot of guys died, but a whole bunch of them got wounded and did not die because we have effective techniques for treating infections and for treating wounds and things like that.
So we've been snowed by modern medicine. They have created some things that, like when penicillin came out and things, it was really good. But we've been snowed to think that we had nothing before.
That's right. And penicillin and all tetracycline and all these other things that came along, I know that the original people that created this really felt that they were being saviors. And I don't know if they really understood the consequences of what would happen, that, you're dealing with life and with nature, and nature will continue to evolve and figure it out. And that's what's happened is those initial, I believe that penicillin is the precursor to what now is one of our more deadly MRSAs. And it came from the evolution of bacteria that eventually evolved past the penicillin. So we're creating our own monsters. Fortunately, oh my gosh, thank you. Those older techniques that our ancestors used 100 years ago or 1,000 years or even 5,000 years ago are still effective. Thank goodness.
Why are they effective? That. What do they do that makes, can you give an example?
Sure. One example is garlic. The humble garlic right in your pantry right now. So let's say, you have some kind of a chest infection or something like that. And you go to take penicillin or tetracycline or one of the amoxicillin or whatever one of the ones are that the doc in the box gives you. Well, all that penicillin has is one ingredient, and that is penicillin, right? Or if you get tetracycline, all it has is tetracycline. Well, if you take a clove of garlic that's been prepared in the appropriate way, and it's real simple, you just crush it and let it air for a little bit, that has at least 25 known constituents. I believe they're finding more all the time. I saw a study recently that said 35 constituents that are all antibacterial, antimicrobial, antifungal. So if you have a bacteria buzzing along and it hits penicillin, well, and it gets killed by the penicillin. But if you got enough of them, somebody's going to figure out how to go around that penicillin. Well, if you've got bugs coming at you and you've got your garlic here, there's like 25 or 35 constituents. Well, those bugs never figure that out. That's just too much, right? That's why.
And they interact with each other too. Probably the garlic they do. If there's 35, it's more complex.
I'm willing to bet they do. It is way more complex. The bottom line is it's way more effective. They dug up some Iceman who's thousands of years old, and he had a form of garlic in his pocket, along with some other herbs that we know of traditionally as antibiotics. That's what he carried. Soldiers in wars historically, they carry, every soldier always carries a little bit of a medical pack with them, right? Even now our soldiers carry bandages and things. They carried garlic.
Now, does studies show that garlic is just as effective as taking an antibiotic that is still working?
Actually, it's more effective because, as we said, it's got more constituents. Now, one of the things about herbal medicine and these traditional medicines that's a little different, and I can see why, I used to, before I knew any better, I used to use the pharmaceutical stuff. The pharmaceutical stuff is quick. You take those pills and boom, you can go right back to work. A lot of the herbal medicine, it's going to take a little while and you have to pay a little more attention to it. And it really helps if you have, some support of a family member or community. I believe industrial medicine has done a huge amount to damage our family structures and our community structures because it's taken that away. And one of the main reasons I got into home medicine was because I wanted to be a mom. I wanted, when my kids got sick, I wanted to tend them. I wanted to take care of them. That's what I want to do. I don't want to go grab a bottle from a drugstore and hand them something. I wanted to make the medicine, and it's been a long thing, but I really now, when my kids get sick, they don't think about going to Walgreens. They come to me and they go, Mom, what do you got for this? I'm kind of stuffed up right now. Or, Mom, what do you got? Can you help me with it? I'm cut. My leg is cut. We don't even, unless it's really, really major, we don't think about going to the hospital or to the doctor. We think about how do we take care of it at home. That bond between my son and I and between my kids and I and my husband and I've been with them through their illnesses and their injuries. That is the thing. That's what I wanted as a mom. And that is the thing that holds a family together, Well,
and does your body react to that and learn how to heal itself a little better too?
Well, absolutely. And then the foundation, of course, we go back to food, which is where we started. Herbal medicine is great. Don't go into an herb shop and be eating McDonald's and think they're going to be able to save you, right? You have to have a good foundation of food. And of course, I've been either growing my own food or buying it from farmers markets or quality sources and insisting on my family having high quality food throughout our experience since we started the family, right? But that foundation of good quality food is essential. Having and really not much happens to us because we're starting with the foundation. We're eating high quality, good, nutritious food that has low, no toxins in them, so that the load on our bodies can be healthy and flourish in those environments. We tend to blow off all sorts of things that seem, they'll go, oh, it's flu season, and we rarely get caught up in that. It happens from time to time, but rarely.
You have a documentary series that's going to have a 72-hour free viewing, and it's going to be on how to grow your own food in less than an hour a day. Can you explain that?
I would, and if I could tell a quick story first. One of the things that really, really impressed me was when I went to Cuba to interview their collapsed, the people who survived that collapse. I asked them, how did this, what was this like? How did it go? And almost immediately the whole society turned upside down, and people who were lawyers and stockbrokers and stuff like that, they were the hardest hit. You know, they were the ones who were most starving. And your lowly gardener, right, the La Jardine, or my Spanish is not so good, suddenly became the neighborhood leader. And fortunately, there were enough people, and there weren't that many, but there were enough of the crazy people that on that neighborhood who was still growing their own food and saving their own seeds and knew how to do it. And they had enough of the old guys they got out of retirement that knew how to harness an ox and plow fields with oxen, and because none of the tractors were working. They had enough of these people that they were basically like seeds that could,
we don't have that.
We're working on building that. And that's one of the main reasons that I'm doing this 72-hour free, how to grow half of your own food in your backyard in less than an hour a day. I want you to watch this. I want you to become that person in your neighborhood that is the leader and is the one that will be called upon. It is absolutely essential that we do this. We are going to undergo economic collapse. There are so many other scenarios for collapse. And if we have enough people who know how to grow food and who know how to make medicine, we can rapidly teach each other. That's one of the great saving graces of humanity, is we learn quickly and we adapt quickly to traumatic change. But we do need enough of those seed people around. And so if this is at all a calling to you, and I'm asking anybody who's out there, 72 hours, what I do is I show you how you can grow half of your own food in your backyard in less than an hour a day. And we involve a small garden, some chickens and some rabbits. And here is the empowering thing. You can do this. It's absolutely, I show you the calories that are generated. I show you the minutes of time, and I show you exactly what's involved with this system. You can do this. And here is the really good thing. I show you how to do this without, it's all organic. It's all sustainable. Yes, you'll be buying from some feed and things in the beginning to help you get started, but this is ultimately something that you can do completely sustainably in your backyard. And if you start eating, if half of your food supply starts coming from your backyard, you will notice tremendous improvements in your health. So if you already have some sort of illnesses, you will really start to see a ramp up to where you become healthy. And if you're already healthy, you will see a ramp up to where you become extraordinarily healthy. Half of your own food in your backyard in less than an hour a day. It's completely worth it. Here's the other thing. This is a system that can easily be scaled up. So all those other crazy people who are going, why are you growing your own food? Or your in-laws that are going, why are you worried about collapse? Or whatever, that think you're nuts, right? Well, when the thing happens and they show up on your front door, you're going to know exactly what to do. You're going to know how to completely scale this up in a lot of different ways, and you'll be able to immediately put them to work and give them something useful to do and something proactive and be able to feed them. So it is completely a system designed to create those neighborhood leaders that we absolutely have to reestablish.
But even if there isn't a collapse, we have so little nutrition and so many people getting cancer and diseases. I mean, it really is, if you look at any chart of this. So feasibly, just by getting this better nutrition, we could save millions of lives.
Yes, actually, there's a real concern, and I think we talked about this last time with the pot and cat studies, that our very genetics are deteriorating, and we're absolutely destroying our species through this poor food supply. And we need to, like more and more of our children, the CDC is saying 1/3 of our kids born after 2000 are going to have diabetes. Like, are you serious? Like 1/3? Like, really? We know that's right now? And that it really has to do with the food supply. We have to turn this around because we're killing ourselves. As I said, the food supply is toxic, and we absolutely have to turn this around.
We have to. So can you talk about the Grow Network? Because it's the largest in the world. And I don't think people realize it's really cool. Can you talk about it? Yeah.
It really is. It's a huge community of people who are producing their own food and medicine. And it's a huge community of people who get this whole conversation that you and I have just had, and they're proactively doing stuff. And we have people from everywhere, and people who are living in deserts, and we have people who are living in the far north, and people who are living in the tropics, and people. So no matter where you live, there are other people in the Grow Network that are doing the same thing, and they're all trying to figure out the best ways to grow food, very similar to the Grow Half system that we've set up. They're trying to figure out, like we got this one retired engineer up in Colorado who's living in this freezing cold place, and he's figuring out how he can build this building that does not require any kind of external heat except for the sun. And he's got all these thermistors, and he's measuring all this stuff, and he's like figuring out how many BTUs a chicken throws off, or can he use a compost pile to heat it up. So it's so cool. And then we've got people in the deserts that are going, hey, here's this variety that did super well. And we had almost no rain last summer. We only had this little bit of irrigation, and we got this great yield, or we've developed this cool shade cloth, in tomatoes. You can't hardly grow tomatoes in the tropics, and these guys have figured out this variety that works there. So it's this great melting pot where we're always sharing and exchanging, and blog posts coming up, and we have monthly phone calls and things, and it's just a really, really fun. We also make it a lot of fun. We have contests and games and just interesting quizzes and puzzles and things.
Well, gardening is the #1 hobby in the world. That's what I've learned too. So a lot of people like this. I'm going to have links to all your stuff here up in the video and in the description, so people know how to get hold of all this stuff. So thank you so much and everything that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate the broader perspective that you bring to this. And we'll be driving a lot of people to the Grow Network to hear this interview, because I'm mostly focused on the solution all the time. And I forget sometimes to think about, this is why we're doing it. So I really appreciate this conversation.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much, and have an amazing day and weekend.
I could be working in the garden, actually, hilling up the potatoes. All right, Sarah, thank you.